May 7, 1945. Northern Germany. Radio bunker 17 kilometers south of Flensburg. The transmitter was warmed and ready. Dials glowed in the dim light. The encoding machine sat on the table with a message sheet positioned beside it. 3 men occupied the underground facility: a signals major, a radio operator, and a cipher clerk. Outside, dawn had broken 40 minutes earlier. The bunker was silent except for the low hum of electrical equipment and ventilation. The message sheet contained 47 words in German military format. It had been delivered by motorcycle courier at 04:22 hours. The major had verified the authentication codes. The operator had prepared the transmission frequency. The cipher clerk had set the encoding rotors to the designated configuration. Everything was ready. The message required only final authorization to transmit. The major stood behind the operator's chair. His hand rested on the back of the seat. The operator's fingers hovered above the transmission key. The cipher clerk sat motionless at his station. All three stared at the equipment. No one spoke. The message sheet remained unencoded. The transmission frequency remained silent. Time: 05:47 hours. The order to transmit had not been given. The major's hand stayed on the chair. His mouth was closed. Nothing happened. The bunker was part of the provisional command network established by what remained of German military authority in Schleswig-Holstein. Following Hitler's death and the collapse of central command structure, Admiral Dönitz had assumed governmental functions from Flensburg. The radio facility served as one of several communication nodes linking scattered military units, naval vessels, and administrative centers across territory not yet occupied by Allied forces. The message had originated from a naval command post coordinating U-boat operations in the Baltic and North Sea. Its content directed submarine commanders at sea to execute contingency orders in response to imminent surrender negotiations. The specific instructions were procedural: designated actions to be taken by submarine crews regarding their vessels, positions, and interaction with Allied forces once formal capitulation was announced. The 3 men in the bunker had been operating this facility for 6 weeks. The major had served in signals since 1940, with experience in France, Russia, and finally Northern Germany. The radio operator was a corporal with 3 years' experience in military communications. The cipher clerk was a lance corporal trained in encoding procedures and security protocols. All 3 understood their function: receive messages from higher command, encode them, transmit to designated recipients, maintain communication discipline, and ensure security of transmission systems. Weather conditions were clear. Atmospheric interference was minimal. The transmission would reach intended recipients without difficulty. U-boats at sea maintained regular monitoring schedules. The message would be received, decoded, and executed according to standard naval procedure. The technical aspects of the transmission presented no obstacles. The bunker itself was well constructed: reinforced concrete, adequate ventilation, backup power systems, secure access. It had not been targeted by Allied bombing. Its location was not compromised. The facility remained fully functional. Equipment was maintained and operational. Supplies were adequate. The 3 men had sufficient food, water, and fuel to continue operations indefinitely if required. The situation was procedurally straightforward. A message had been delivered with proper authentication. The transmission system was ready. The recipients were monitoring the designated frequency. Standard procedure required encoding and transmission. The major possessed the authority to order transmission. No technical or security factors prevented execution. Everything was prepared. The only requirement was the major's order. German military communications doctrine emphasized reliability, security, and immediate execution. Messages from higher command were to be transmitted without delay once authentication was verified. The Signal Corps operated under strict discipline. Hesitation or unauthorized delay in message transmission constituted a serious breach of procedure. Orders were orders. The communication chain existed to ensure commands reached their destinations rapidly and accurately. The major had transmitted hundreds of messages during his service. The process was routine: verify authentication, encode message, transmit on designated frequency, confirm receipt when possible, log transmission in operational records. The sequence was mechanical and practiced. Deviation from procedure was not contemplated under normal circumstances. The system functioned because every node executed its role precisely. Naval standing orders regarding U-boats were unambiguous. Submarine commanders operated under sealed instructions to be opened under specific conditions. The message prepared for transmission would trigger execution of those instructions. The submarines would act according to predetermined protocols. This system ensured coordinated action even when direct communication with command authority was interrupted or impossible. The operator understood his role: transmit when ordered, maintain proper frequency and power settings, ensure clear signal quality, record transmission details in the log. He had performed this function successfully throughout his service. His technical competence was established. The equipment responded reliably to his operation. There was no reason to expect difficulty or failure in this transmission. The cipher clerk's responsibility was equally clear: encode the message according to designated cipher settings, verify accuracy of encoding, ensure security of cipher materials, maintain proper handling of classified documents. He had completed the preparation. The encoding machine was configured correctly. The message was ready to be processed and transmitted. His part of the procedure was complete. Military communications networks depended on each component functioning without independent judgment. The bunker was not an evaluative node. It was a transmission relay. The content of messages was irrelevant to the transmission function. Authentication determined whether a message was legitimate. Once authenticated, it was to be transmitted. The system collapsed if individual operators began making independent assessments of message content or strategic implications. The three men in the bunker had been trained in this understanding. Their function was technical, not strategic. They served the communication system. The major's authority extended to verification of proper procedure and security, not to evaluation of operational orders. The message before them was properly authenticated. It required transmission. This was the expectation. This was the procedure. This was what should happen next. At 0551, the operator looked up at the major. The major's expression was blank. He did not look down. He stared at the wall above the transmitter. His hand remained on the chair. His breathing was steady and slow. The operator spoke: "Sir, ready to transmit." The major did not respond. The cipher clerk shifted in his seat. He glanced at the operator, then at the major. No one moved. The equipment hummed. The message sheet lay on the table, still unencoded. The encoding machine waited. The transmission key remained untouched. Seconds accumulated. 10, 20. The operator's fingers stayed above the key. The major's hand stayed on the chair. The cipher clerk's eyes moved between the two men. Still no order, still no movement. The transmission did not begin. The operator spoke again: "Frequency is clear, sir. Ready when ordered." The major lowered his head. He looked at the message sheet. His eyes moved across the text. He read it again, though he had already read it twice before. His lips did not move. His face showed nothing. He looked at the clock on the wall: 0553. He looked back at the message sheet. He reached forward. His hand moved toward the paper. It stopped before touching it. His fingers hung in the air. Then he withdrew his hand. He stepped back from the operator's chair. He turned away from the transmitter. He walked to the far end of the bunker. He stood facing the wall. He said nothing. The message remained untransmitted. The operator looked at the cipher clerk. The cipher clerk looked back. Neither spoke. The major stood at the far end of the bunker with his back to them. His posture was rigid. His hands were at his sides. He did not turn around. He did not give instructions. He simply stood facing the concrete wall. Minutes passed. The operator checked his watch. 0558. Procedure required transmission to occur promptly upon receipt of authenticated messages. Delay was not explained in doctrine. There was no protocol for this situation. The operator did not know whether to wait for orders, to request clarification, or to proceed independently. He chose to wait. His hands dropped to his lap. He remained in his chair, staring at the dormant transmission key. The cipher clerk adjusted the encoding machine's settings slightly, then returned them to the correct configuration. It was a nervous gesture, procedurally unnecessary. The machine was already properly configured. He was simply moving his hands because sitting motionless had become unbearable. He looked at the message sheet again. The text had not changed. The authentication codes remained valid. Everything was exactly as it had been 5 minutes earlier, except no transmission had occurred. At 0607 the operator stood. He walked to the major's position. He stopped 2 meters behind him. He cleared his throat. The major did not turn. The operator spoke. "Sir, shall I proceed with transmission?" The major's shoulders moved slightly, not a shrug, not a shiver, just a small adjustment of posture. He did not answer. The operator waited 10 seconds, then returned to his station. He sat down. He did not touch the equipment. The cipher clerk broke the silence. "The message is time-sensitive. Naval Command will expect confirmation of transmission." His voice was quiet, factual. He was stating procedure, not challenging authority. The major did not respond. The cipher clerk said nothing further. He remained at his position, hands folded on the table. Time stretched into a form that felt disconnected from the clock. Each minute lasted longer than the previous one. The hum of the equipment became more audible as silence deepened. Outside sounds, distant vehicle engines, wind, birds penetrated the bunker faintly. Inside, nothing moved. The 3 men occupied the space without interaction, each isolated in uncertainty. At 0622 the major turned around. He walked back to the transmission station. He stood beside the operator. He looked at the message sheet. He looked at the encoding machine. He looked at the transmitter. His face remained expressionless. He opened his mouth as if to speak. No words emerged. He closed his mouth. He walked to the access ladder and climbed to the surface. The hatch closed behind him. The operator and cipher clerk were alone. The major returned to the bunker at 0641. He said nothing about where he had been or what he had done. He did not reference the unmade transmission. He walked to the table where the message sheet lay and picked it up. He folded it once, then again. He placed it in his tunic pocket. He told the operator to secure the transmitter. He told the cipher clerk to reset the encoding machine to neutral configuration and to file the cipher materials in the security container. Both men complied without question. The operator powered down the transmitter. The cipher clerk removed the rotors from the encoding machine and stored them according to security protocol. The major made no entry in the operational log. No transmission record was created because no transmission had occurred. The message simply disappeared into his pocket. The equipment was secured. The facility returned to standby status. Later testimony, provided during Allied interrogation in June 1945, indicated that the major had assessed the message content as operationally obsolete. Surrender negotiations were progressing rapidly. Official capitulation announcements were expected within hours. The message had been prepared and dispatched before the final diplomatic developments were known. By the time it reached the bunker, circumstances had shifted. Transmitting orders to U-boat commanders that would soon be superseded by formal surrender terms served no operational purpose. Additionally, the major recognized that German naval command authority was dissolving. The provisional government in Flensburg had limited practical control. Orders issued from fragmenting command structures carried decreasing weight. Submarine commanders at sea were receiving information through multiple channels, some official, some unofficial. Transmitting one more set of instructions into an increasingly chaotic communication environment would add confusion rather than clarity. The decision to withhold transmission was not framed as defiance. It was framed as operational judgment. The major determined that the military situation had evolved past the point where the message remained relevant. Executing the transmission would have been procedurally correct, but situationally meaningless. He chose to treat the message as overtaken by events. This interpretation allowed him to avoid transmission without explicitly refusing an order. The choice was made individually and quietly. He did not consult higher authority because communication with higher authority was itself fragmenting. He did not discuss it with his subordinates because the decision was his alone. He simply stopped the process at the moment of execution and secured the equipment. The message never left the bunker. The U-boats never received those particular instructions, and within 18 hours, formal surrender rendered all such communications irrelevant. The three men remained in the bunker through the day. Routine monitoring continued. No further messages arrived for transmission. Radio traffic across military frequencies decreased steadily as units received stand-down orders or simply ceased operations. By mid-afternoon, most channels were silent or carried only fragmentary administrative communications. At 18:30 hours, the major received a radio message, not for transmission but addressed to the bunker itself. The message directed all communication facilities to cease military transmissions and to prepare for handover to Allied control. Specific instructions would follow. The major acknowledged receipt. He did not log the untransmitted message from that morning. It remained in his pocket. The operator and cipher clerk secured equipment according to shutdown procedures. Cipher materials were inventoried and prepared for surrender. Transmitters were powered down completely. Backup systems were deactivated. The bunker transitioned from operational to dormant status. By 20:00 hours, all active systems were offline. The facility existed but no longer functioned. The three men ate a cold meal from remaining rations. They did not discuss the morning's events. Conversation was minimal and procedural. Tasks completed, equipment status, next steps. The operator mentioned that formal surrender would likely be announced soon. The major confirmed this was probable. The cipher clerk said nothing. They finished eating and prepared to sleep in the bunker, awaiting further orders. The next morning, May 8, formal announcement of German surrender was broadcast. The major, operator, and cipher clerk listened to the transmission on a receiver. The war in Europe was over. They remained in the bunker through May 9, maintaining presence but performing no duties. On May 10, British military personnel arrived and took control of the facility. The three Germans were processed as prisoners of war. During processing, the major was asked about recent transmission activity. He stated that the facility had ceased significant operations on May 6 and had transmitted only routine administrative traffic on May 7. The British officer did not press for details. The major was not asked about specific messages or any decisions regarding transmission protocols. The interview was brief and administrative. He was transported to a holding facility and later to a prisoner of war camp. The message remained in his pocket until personal effects were confiscated during camp intake procedures. The untransmitted message was never documented in operational logs. The naval command post that had sent it was overrun by British forces on May 8. Its records were captured, but communication logs showed only that the message had been dispatched via courier. Confirmation of transmission was never received because no confirmation was ever sent. The gap in the record was attributed to the chaos of collapse, one more administrative detail lost in the disintegration of command structure. The U-boats that would have received the message proceeded according to other instructions received through other channels. Some surrendered at sea. Some returned to port. Some scuttled themselves. The outcomes would likely have been identical whether the message had been transmitted or not. The content became irrelevant within hours of its composition. The major's decision to withhold transmission had no measurable operational effect. Post-war interrogation of German signals personnel focused on intelligence gathering, order of battle information, communication procedures, technical capabilities, command relationships. The functioning of individual communication nodes during the final days of the war was not examined in detail. Thousands of facilities had been shut down or captured. The specific activities of one radio bunker in Schleswig-Holstein held no particular interest. The Major's interrogation file contains no reference to the May 7 incident. The operator and cipher clerk were released from prisoner of war status in 1946 and 1947, respectively. Neither left recorded accounts of their service. Post-war documentation focused on major operations, significant decisions, and documented actions. Routine signals work was not preserved in personal narratives or historical analyses. The event in the bunker existed only in the memories of the three men who had been present. The message sheet itself, confiscated with the Major's personal effects, was processed as captured material. It was catalogued, translated, and filed. The file notation indicated it was a naval communication regarding U-boat operations dated May 7, 1945. No notation indicated it had never been transmitted. The document appeared identical to thousands of other captured German military messages. Its singularity, that it represented an order deliberately withheld from execution, was invisible in the archive. The Major was released from captivity in 1948. He returned to civilian life in Lower Saxony. He worked in telecommunications, civilian radio services, eventually transitioning to early television broadcasting infrastructure. His military service was noted in employment records, but without detail. He did not join veterans organizations. He did not participate in post-war military historical projects. He died in 1971. His obituary mentioned wartime signals service, but provided no specifics. The radio operator settled in the Rhineland after release in 1946. He worked in electrical maintenance and repair. He married in 1949 and raised 3 children. In the 1960s, he was interviewed briefly by a local history project documenting wartime experiences. His account mentioned signals work in northern Germany, but did not reference the final days of the war in detail. He died in 1989. The cipher clerk emigrated to Canada in 1951. Records of his later life are fragmentary. He appears in immigration documents and census records through the 1960s, working in various technical positions. He did not maintain contact with German military veterans. His connection to the May 7 incident exists only in prisoner of war processing documents that list his assignment to the Flensburg area signals network. None of the 3 men are known to have discussed the untransmitted message in any documented context. If they spoke of it privately, no record survives. The incident held no particular significance in the larger narrative of their lives. It was one decision among thousands made during the war, a moment of withheld action in a period defined by collapse, confusion, and the rapid obsolescence of military procedures. The radio bunker was decommissioned by British occupation authorities in 1945. The facility was filled with rubble and sealed. The location was later used for agricultural purposes. No marker indicates the site's wartime function. The bunker no longer exists as an accessible structure. The ground above shows no evidence of what was once below. May 7, 1945 was the day before the war ended. Across Germany, military units were disbanding, surrendering, or simply ceasing to function. Orders were issued and ignored. Communications reached destinations that no longer existed. The machinery of command continued operating briefly past the point of relevance, then stopped. In one radio bunker in Schleswig-Holstein, a message arrived that was never sent. A transmitter warmed and ready was never keyed. An operator prepared to act received no order. A major stood in a concrete room and chose not to speak the word that would have initiated transmission. The message remained encoded only in its original text, never converted to radio signal, never received by distant submarines waiting in prescribed monitoring schedules. The signal that was never transmitted made no sound. It left no trace in operational logs. It did not alter the course of events. It existed only as potential, a communication prepared but withheld, an action possible but not taken. The silence in that bunker on that morning was the silence of a decision made without announcement, executed through inaction, and preserved only in the absence it created. The war ended the next day. The message became historical debris, one paper among millions, one decision among countless others, one moment when a human being standing in front of functioning equipment chose not to complete the procedure he had been trained to execute. The choice was quiet, unrecorded, and complete. The signal that should have traveled across hundreds of kilometers of air and sea remained contained within the walls of a room 17 kilometers south of Flensburg, dissolved into silence, and disappeared.